With that, I'll move to the next speaker. So next speaker we have is Ishan Gupta. He's a graduate of Georgetown University's Walsh School of Foreign Services based in Washington, D.C. He has experience in international governance. He has done his internship with the U.S. Legislative Assembly and U.S. House of Representatives. Besides that, he had been in India for last 1 year on Fulbright Nehru Research Grant for doing research in rural development and energy access equality. So he will be discussing his experiences on this BharatAI lab models and similar models in OECD countries. So with that, Ishan, I'll present your slides and share the screen.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much for the opportunity to speak while those slides are getting up. Again, my name is Ishan. I'm a former Fulbright scholar, Georgetown graduate, and I have engaged pretty frequently with the work that BharatAI Labs does in my visits to India. So I'm excited to talk about not only that program, but also how it compares to programs I've seen in other places as well. Just waiting for those slides to come up.
Can you see the slides now?
I cannot. Can anybody else? Or okay, there we go. We're good to go. Perfect. So again, today I'll be speaking about how we can compare the model that Bhavna ma'am just went over as it pertains to BharatAI Labs and how that compares to other countries that have similar programs for STEM education. So next slide. To begin, I want to situate this conversation within our discussion of the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. So as the previous presenter explained, one of the goals that this program addresses is that of reduced inequalities, or Sustainable Development Goal number 10. So like was mentioned, goal number 10 aims to reduce inequality not only among different countries, but also within a specific country. And the BharatAI Labs model, as well as other STEM programs, work to do both of those things. When looking at how to root out inequality between different groups, it needs to start at a foundational baseline level. And that starts with equal access to education. If individuals are not getting the same education, then we cannot expect them to have the same growth opportunities and outcomes moving forward. So when looking at this sustainable development goal, to address inequalities, you need to first address education. Now, within education, there are specific areas you can focus on as well. You can focus on STEM education and digital literacy as two key tools to help decrease the barriers between various individuals. STEM education and digital literacy is the key to tomorrow. And as such, if we understand the different models that help individuals, we can drive a decrease in inequality. Now, let's first understand what I mean by OECD countries. That's the term that was used. As you can see on this map, any country that is in dark blue or light blue is what is called a part of the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development. Now, these are countries that might be a little further economically developed for their population size. It's not to say that their economies are necessarily bigger, but they might have more equality, more social services. When looking at countries, it's an important benchmark to compare to different countries. So today's presentation will be situated in how we can compare the OECD countries to India specifically. Now that begins with understanding what is called the digital divide. So the digital divide is a very important concept to understand, as it shows that the access to modern internet and communication technologies are not equal across countries. Although all of us here on this call today have access to internet and a device, that is not the case for a lot of other people, both where I live, as well as in India and in other countries. So let's take a look at some statistics. First, internet access. 92% of households in OECD countries like the United States, Germany, France, the United Kingdom all have internet. But when you look at India, that number is closer to 54%. Now let's take a look at digital literacy, or the ability to know how to use a phone, how to use a laptop, how to type, how to surf the internet. In OECD countries, that number is 90% of adults who have an understanding of digital literacy. Whereas in India, that number is closer to 30%, a 60% difference. Or let's take a look at technology in the classroom, a very relevant topic today. In OECD countries, again, 90% of classrooms have some sort of technology integrated into the work. But in India, that number is 40%. So what's important to understand from these numbers is that even if you on this call might have access to internet and classroom technology, that might not be the case for a lot of your other peers in your own country. So with that, now that we've understood the digital literacy divide and the digital divide more broadly, let's talk about how other countries have approached this issue. We've understood how BharatAI Labs has done a great model in India specifically, but let's see how other countries have tackled it. Now, what is the general approach? When looking at OECD countries in the United States, the UK, Germany, generally there's a high investment in technology on a large scale. Rather than targeting specific subgroups, these countries have decided to invest large amounts of money to make sure everybody has access right away. Now, obviously, that requires a lot of funding that maybe some countries don't have. In fact, the average annual spending per student in education in OECD countries is between $12,000 and $13,000 per year, either privately spent or by the governments of these countries. That translates to 10.5 lakh rupees per year per student. That is an extremely high number when you take that to other countries. Now, the curriculum is strong. There's advanced technology, there's interdisciplinary learning, but we're going to need to understand whether that much money is really required for the outcomes we want. And you'll see the answer to that is no. Now, when we look at the statistics, yes, OECD countries are doing well. 90% of students have access to internet. They score an average of 10 to 15% higher in international STEM assessments. But again, it's important to situate that within the context of how much they have in their bank accounts. Now, I want to quickly scan through 3 example programs that compare to BharatAI Labs in how they conduct STEM education. The first project is that of which I am more familiar with, which is Project Lead the Way. This is a STEM curriculum in the United States for 1st to 12th grade students. This has similar models to BharatAI Labs with hands-on engineering, biomedical, computer science. Now, with the expansion, this program serves 17 lakh students. So it's a pretty large program, and it costs roughly 70,000 Indian rupees per year per student. Again, a pretty high amount. Let's take a look at the next program. This is the European Union's, next slide, please. The next program is the European Union's e-twinning program, a similar program to that in the United States, but this allows students from different schools to collaborate with each other on STEM-related topics. They're challenging projects related to biomedical science, robotics engineering, digital literacy, coding competitions, hackathons, similar things to what is being done right now in India. But this happens across a wider scale of schools. This program is servicing 20 lakh students in 40 countries with a lower cost of operation, 35,000 rupees per student, which is still very high, but they've shown that they can drop the price a little bit to reach the same outcomes. Now, the final example I want to give is from Japan. The Japan Science and Technology STEM program is a government-run program that has initiatives and project-oriented learning for all age levels and all skill levels interwoven into the curriculum. So whereas the United States and Europe have a very detached model of STEM education, Japan has really tried to integrate it into their regular learning as well. In fact, this program serves 30 lakh students, a pretty high number, at a middle level cost of 45,000 rupees per student. Now, the reason I give you these 3 models is to show you that every country is attempting to have some sort of STEM education. We all understand that it is a valuable thing to do, but every country is approaching it differently. And there's things that both sides should learn from one another in order to maximize outcomes. So on the next slide, what we're going to see is that when we benchmark, next slide, please. Perfect. So now let's just do a high-level view of BharatAI Labs. I know Bhavna ma'am did a great job at explaining the mission and the goals. But again, what is BharatAI Labs? Well, their goal is to increase STEM outreach, going through schools, colleges, community centers to help fill the gap in accessibility. What the government and what the private sector couldn't do, BharatAI Labs is coming in and reducing the inequality by taking quality education and innovation to rural and underprivileged groups. Now, their approach is slightly different than the other approaches that I talked about. Whereas the other three programs I talked about were specifically related to government programs or very highly funded programs, I would say BharatAI Labs operates a grassroots model in which they try to involve local community members and as many volunteers in their process to ensure that the outcomes are changed. They use innovative teaching methods, international support, such as a future presenter that you're going to be seeing, low-cost solutions, as well as volunteer time and government grants to maximize student outcome. And as a result, they require minimal investments from the school. So this is a very starkly different model than the other three that I just outlined. Next slide. So let's benchmark this a little bit. Let's understand how these sets of programs compare. So BharatAI Labs, based on the information that I've received and kind of what I've seen in my visits to the operations, operates at a cost of about 300 rupees per student per year. And you read that right. For a STEM technical digital literacy program, that is an extremely low amount. But how have they done it? They have not put the cost on the students. They have leveraged volunteers, international support, and government grants to make sure that this cost is not a barrier for students to get access to learning. And as such, they have provided a very low cost per student that usually isn't even administered to the students themselves, but is rather given on the school level. As a result of this, they can target low-income communities with limited resources. Now, let's take a look at the OECD countries. Again, the United States, European Union, or Japan. That costs 35,000 to 70,000 rupees per student per year. That is between 100 to 200 times more expensive. I can guarantee you that the outcomes that they're seeing are not 100 to 200 times better, however. So there is some sort of middle ground to be found where we can leverage the expertise of our grassroots communities to actually create change without spending so much money per student. So as such, my final two slides really want to delve into what we can learn from both sides of this equation. What can India learn from other countries? And more importantly, what can other countries learn from India? So first, let's take a look at what India can learn from these OECD countries. First, the other OECD countries have really done a great job of leveraging significant private investment. They have tie-ups with a lot of corporations, a lot of corporate leaders, so then they can subsidize the cost of the education. But this does mean they have to operate at a higher threshold. So leveraging the private sector is both good and bad in that sense, but it is an important player to engage when it comes to technology. Second, the OECD countries like the United States, Europe, Japan have very strong digital infrastructure across the board. They are not targeting specific communities. Rather, they are ensuring that digital access is available for any individual that wants it. What does this do? Improving connectivity and technology for everybody makes it so if somebody wants to enter the space and become literate, they have a much lower threshold to enter. So what can India learn? India's government can specifically learn to target high digital infrastructure to make sure that using a phone, using a computer, learning how to type are not things that are second orders of priority, but are rather integrated into daily life. And finally, I would articulate that these OECD countries have much stronger government frameworks. The government is a little more heavily involved in these countries to roll out funding and regulation to support. And I would call on the Indian government to continue supporting small grassroots movements like BharatAI Labs and others to have this increased government involvement to help give them support as well as credibility on the field. Next slide. Now, the important other aspect of this is, what can other countries learn from India on this topic? We've seen that India has done a great job, specifically the BharatAI Labs model, on driving down the cost of this education. So what can they learn? Well, first, the BharatAI Labs model, as well as other similar programs, include diverse backgrounds of individuals. You have people who have very little knowledge of how computers and robotics work, all the way to people who might have a good sense. And they're really importantly including everybody on this spectrum of needs as a spectrum of backgrounds, whether it's cultural backgrounds or linguistic backgrounds. So OECD countries should learn how to bring in everybody into the fold to ensure that everybody has equal access. Second, India has operated and successfully rolled out models like BharatAI Labs despite strong digital infrastructure. They've been able to create high quality STEM education and digital literacy without the large investments that other countries have made. So there is something to learn about how to target the right communities without needing blanket solutions. And finally, this is most important. Other countries should learn from BharatAI Labs as well as other programs on how to have lower cost operations. BharatAI Labs is driving strong outcomes without a price tag that is 200 times more expensive than a counterpart program. So we need to understand how BharatAI Labs leverages volunteers, leverages government and private sector grants, and ensures that only the basic, most important things are costed for and not superfluous items. And as such, if the BharatAI Labs model can be exported to other countries, we can see digital literacy rising for everyone, because frankly, the biggest barrier is cost right now. Next slide. So today we discussed first, sustainable development goal number 10, understanding the importance of STEM education in reducing inequalities. Second, we discussed what is called the digital divide between OECD countries and India. Third, we went through some programs in OECD countries, such as that of the United States, Europe, and Japan. Fourth, we discussed BharatAI Labs and their unique model to STEM education. And finally, we discussed what could be some learning both ways for programs in India and programs in OECD countries to impact as many people as possible and drive as much change. So with that, that wraps up my presentation, and I would like to pass it back to the convener. Thank you.